Good evening, everyone. So I'd like to call this special meeting of council to order at 7 p.m. on August 3rd, 2022. We'll stay seated for a moment of silent reflection. Thank you. Are there any declarations of opinion or interest in the general nature thereof? Seeing none, is there any correspondence? No correspondence, so we'll move on to the business for which the meeting was called, and item 5.1 is the asset management plan. And I'll turn that over to staff.
So tonight, Ian Broom from Public Sector Digest, he's going to give a presentation on our asset management plan. We have now completed it. And hi, Emil, how are you tonight?
All right, I'm finding some trouble hearing you, but I guess I can start my presentation, right?
Yes, welcome. We're glad to have you with us tonight, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
All right, so let me, can I move forward and share my screen? Or are you gonna use your monitor for the slide deck?
We're going to share a screen for you.
All right, I'm assuming you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So, as mentioned, my name is Ali Ibrahim. I'm an asset management consultant at PSD Citywide, and I'm going to be presenting about your asset management plan that we've developed as part of the ORIG requirements, and we're also going to discuss the policy that we developed as well as part of this project. So, usually
we're getting a bit of an echo. I'm not sure if it's on this end or on your end.
All right. Yeah, I'm finding some trouble hearing you, but yeah, I'll try to use my headset. Maybe it's better this way.
Okay.
Yeah, just give me a sec to connect my headset to the PC.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult to understand with that term.
All right, is it better now?
Seems to be better now, yeah.
All right, let's try it now. Apologies for that. It usually works well, but I don't know what happened today. So I'm gonna share my screen again, and I'm gonna right. Just making sure that you can see it again.
Yes.
All right, perfect then. Apologies for this. So in terms of the agenda, we're going to start by defining what is asset management, just to give a background on what the practice is about. Then we're going to discuss what is included under the Ontario Regulation 58817. What are the key findings of the asset management plan? What are some key recommendations? And finally, we'll end up with some discussions about the proposed levels of service or the concept of levels of service in general. this being said, asset management as a definition, I always like to start similar presentations by defining asset management as service management, because at the end of the day, these assets do exist to provide services for the community. And if they're not providing any service, even though they may have like a financial value or any type of value, but they won't be utilized and they won't have any functional utility. Therefore, we consider that the assets are the conduits for the service. And this is why it is always essential to keep in mind that whenever we're discussing asset management, we're actually referring to service management in general, because these assets, as mentioned, are the backbone for the services. So, for example, roads, they do provide a transportation service. So if a certain road is leading from nowhere to nowhere, it won't have any functional utility. Whereas if it's leading from point A to point B and there are commuters using this road, then it's providing an essential service to the community. In terms of the Ontario Regulation 58817, it's basically split into 4 key milestones. And what we've covered so far in the project covers 2 of the key milestones. So the first one was to adopt a strategic asset management policy to basically highlight the council's buy-in to adopting an asset management program. That was due in 2019. However, this hasn't been completed by the municipality since then. So we did include it as part of this project to ensure that, you're compliant with the OREX to the 2022 requirements, including the asset management policy, which was due in 2019. So basically, what's included under the policy is some key statements regarding asset management, what it's planning to achieve, how is it aligned with the strategic direction of the township, and what are some key rules and responsibilities, and what are some key actions that are required from this practice or program. So this is complete and it's attached, I guess, to the agenda of the meeting. The next key deliverable, which is the focus of today's presentation, is an asset management plan, and this was due in 2022, July 1st, an asset management plan for the core assets. And in your case, core assets are the roads and your storm infrastructure or your culverts. So for this plan, we're basically covering the current levels of service. We're performing an asset inventory analysis. We're covering some current performance metrics related to assets, and we're basically documenting the life cycle activities and the cost to maintain current levels of service when it comes to the assets that are in scope. We also covered the impacts of growth on these current levels of service. That's what's required for July of 2022. Focusing really on the current levels of service. For July of 2024, and this is also included as part of the project scope, and we will be working on this moving forward this year and potentially a bit next year, is another asset management plan, but this time for core and non-core infrastructure assets. So this would basically include assets such as buildings, facilities, vehicle, and equipment. So what we've covered so far is an asset management plan for the core infrastructure assets related to their current levels of service. We're going to be covering the current levels of service for core and non-core assets later on during this project as well. For the 2025 requirements, the province really wants municipalities to start thinking about the proposed levels of service. And this is why they started this practice or this regulation by tackling the current levels of service, because they are very essential to basically set the ground for the proposed ones and for the trade-offs. So for the 2025 plan, we're going to be covering all of the previously covered items for the core and non-core assets, but we're going to be focusing on the proposed levels of service and how to achieve these proposed levels of service, and also comparing the funding available to the funding required, and how can we close this funding gap in order to achieve or to deliver these desired or proposed levels of service. Also included under this plan is another discussion about the impacts of growth on the proposed levels of service. So back to this focus of today's presentation, which is the asset management plan focusing on the current levels of service for core assets, which are roads and culverts in your case, we did ask ourselves a few questions while developing this asset management plan. First question was, what is the current state of the municipal infrastructure? Or in other terms, what is the condition or what are the conditions of the assets included in scope? Another key question is, what process improvements can increase confidence in analysis and decision making? So with this, we kind of tried to revise some replacement costs in order to add some consistency and some accuracy to the total replacement value of your portfolio. We also focused on developing some risk prioritization criteria, looking at the probability of failure and the consequence of failure to basically help you moving forward in your decision making by linking this decision making to risk. And we also looked at some of the life cycle management strategies that are currently adopted and some other ones that could be adopted and that can basically facilitate decision making moving forward based on a set of criteria. Another key consideration as part of this plan was to actually come up with a calculation and get a sense of what the long-term capital requirements are. And going back to the actual numbers of the plan, we did end up with a portfolio value of $59.2 million, and that's mainly your roads. It also includes about $1.1 million for your storm network or your culverts in other terms, which does translate to about $33,000 per household. And typically people do neglect or they tend to forget that in order for them to live in a community, there is a need for infrastructure, because without infrastructure, housing would become impossible to a certain extent, and this would have major reductions impacts on the quality of life. Going more into detail when it comes to the actual condition of the assets, and as you can see here, we have assessed condition for about 100% of the road network. And these condition assessments are basically some condition assessments that we had. I think these were done by a third-party contractor at some point, and we did revise them with staff in order to offer a better reflection of the actual conditions for your roads today. For the storm network or the culvert, we used an age-based condition, and this did translate into having 20% of your assets in fair or better condition, which is a sign that some of the assets are reaching maybe their end of service life, and some of the assets may need some intervention, whether it's rehabilitation or replacement. Now back to the forecasted capital annual requirements based on the calculation related to the replacement cost of the total asset portfolio and the life cycle management strategies that we've identified for the roads, whether these are like rehabilitations or replacements. The average annual capital requirements are about $1.7 million on a yearly basis. As you can see here, it does fluctuate to a certain extent, and there's some backlog towards the beginning, as it's represented in this graph, which does show the average annual capital requirements in 5-year brackets. So, and it does give you an indication over a period of about 55 years. So it does fluctuate to a certain extent, but however, the average is about $1.7 million. And that's to basically keep on delivering the current levels of service that you are delivering. Once you get to the 2025 plan and start discussing stuff about the proposed levels of service, this can change based on the level of spending required and the actual levels of service that you're trying to attain. In terms of key recommendations for the program, as we move forward in this process, we basically recommend that you keep on refining the data for the core and non-core assets, the inventory data, and to also collect more data regarding the condition of assets, because once we have some good data about the condition of assets, we can basically project better into the future and know better when assets would require replacement or when would they require rehabilitation or any type of capital activity. We also recommend that you continue to update the life cycle strategies and replacement costs. So basically looking at your roads, you might end up changing the strategy that you want to employ on your road, you might end up wanting to change the triggers or the impacts of some activities. So this is really important in order to ensure that your capital planning is actually aligned with your current practices. Another key consideration is to update replacement costs as you move forward, always in this program, because the world we live in today, there's a lot of uncertainty, especially regarding inflation. So the prices of stuff are really fluctuating. So in order to have some accurate projections, it is essential to have your replacement costs accurate to a certain extent. Another key consideration is to continue to evaluate the levels of service and risk in order to make sure that you have current levels of service and risk data for all asset categories, and to potentially start having some discussions about the proposed levels of service. And this is actually included as part of the project scope that we're going to be working on later this year. So we're going to be building all of the life cycle management frameworks, levels of service frameworks, and the risk frameworks. So this is kind of already included in the project package before your 2024 asset management plan. And it's also actually a preparation for the 2025 plan as well. Another key consideration is to integrate growth considerations into asset management practices. So because the 2025 plan does require to present the impacts of growth on the proposed lifecycle management activities and the financial strategy. So how would growth impact the proposed levels of service that you're trying to achieve, and what would this look like from a financial perspective? What's the cost of growth in other terms? Now, back to the concept of levels of service, and I really like to emphasize on this a bit more because it's kind of one of the foundations of asset management, because at the end of the day, levels of service are a combination of cost, performance, and risk. And this is kind of the iron triangle in asset management. So whenever thinking about the concept of proposed levels of service moving forward and how to achieve these, we always have to keep in mind that there's always a cost associated to any level of service. There's a risk and there's a performance level that we're trying to attain. So basically, in terms of decision making, it's always a balance between these three, and this is what we're gonna ensure to cover in the development of the levels of service framework and the risk framework moving forward in this project. And with this, I'll open up the floor to any questions.
Councilor Tom.
Going back to the chart that had the forecasted capital requirements, can you tell me why the amount in 2025 and 2030 is so small compared to the other years?
Yeah, so basically, this is based on the best available data at the time of the analysis. So from what I can see here, there's a spending spike in the 2020 to 2025 period, and I'm guessing this is because some of the assets may have reached their end of service life, and therefore they may need replacement. This is kind of a mathematical exercise based on the life cycle management requirements. So maybe the reason why these numbers are a bit low is that during these years, there are not much activities to be completed on mainly your road network from a capital perspective, because some of the activities would have taken place in the previous years from 2020 till 2025. But according to best practices, it is very useful to basically always look at these projections in order to ensure that you flatten the curve as much as possible. So this here is a perfect example, because you may want to defer some activities from the 2020-2025 period, or you may want to start with some activities from the 2035 till the 2040 period in the 2025 till 2030 period to basically flatten this curve. But this is basically a mathematical exercise. It does look at when is an activity required and how much is the cost of this activity based on an analysis that our software does. So I'm hoping this answers your question.
Okay, and it does. Can you tell me what the storm network is? I tried to figure it out and I couldn't.
Can you come again? I couldn't hear you properly.
Define the storm network. What is that?
Your culverts.
My what? Oh, the culverts.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Good.
And any other questions?
Councilor Buckle.
I think it just goes on a little bit further, but just to confirm, this is only our hard top road, not our gravel roads.
So if I got your question correctly, I think you're asking about whether this included your gravel roads. It's basically for paved roads only. So gravel roads weren't included as part of this analysis because according to best practices, if these roads are maintained properly, they won't require replacement, and therefore they're not funded from a capital budget. It's rather funded from an operational budget. So this is why these are not typically included in asset management plans, or actually in the ORIG asset management plans.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So the next big step, Elio, is just as you were saying, to come up with and establish a level of service. So that level of service basically is the direction to staff as to when a asset has to be rehabilitated. So whether it's at 50% of its useful life or 40%, is that correct?
That's actually accurate. So levels of service do typically include a few key components. So what you did list now is a very good example about technical levels of service. So rephrasing what you said, let's say you want to reach an average condition score for the roads of 70% or 70 PCI, pavement condition index. What is required in order to reach this targeted level of service? Another key component of levels of service is basically the community levels of service, and these are basically how the community is experiencing infrastructure. So it's basically split into two main components: the technical side and the community side. And the example that you just gave is really important, because let's say we do set this target. It could be fueled by some complaints from the community, so that's also considered a level of service, and maybe some spending on the roads as well. So if we were to set this target, what would be the financial implications of having an average PCI of 70%? We'd have to look at that. Another key consideration is, what is the risk associated with this level of service? If we don't have enough money to maintain this level of service, can we maybe sacrifice 5% if the risk isn't too high? So whenever giving staff some direction, these are important considerations to take into account, because levels of service are something really big, and we always have to keep in mind that we're discussing the technical ones, the community ones, but also including some consideration to the risk and to the actual spending levels.
Thank you. So currently, according to the report, when it gets into more detail, our level of service, we really don't have a pavement condition index. We basically replace our roads when they are fully deteriorated. So that is going to be our challenge moving forward.
Yeah, so that's your current life cycle strategy as documented in the report. But if you take a look at the report, you'll see that we kind of provided a proposed life cycle management strategy, a very high level one that can typically increase the lifespan of your roads. And we did the analysis based on this proposed life cycle management activity. So that's a key challenge for most municipalities. They typically run their roads to failure. However, if you start implementing a life cycle management program and start doing more rehabilitations to your road, this is when you can start comparing the expenses that you're putting towards the rehabilitation versus the expenses that you're putting towards replacement at the end of the life cycle, and basically compare both options, so that you can make a decision on whether these life cycle management activities are effective or not.
And one other question. So in your experience in your role, where do we compare to other municipalities? Are we in the majority as far as starting a program? Are we behind? Where do we compare to other municipalities?
This is a really good question. So, and we've worked with about half of the municipalities in Ontario on developing their asset management plans and asset management programs. So, typically, when I would do this comparison, I would compare you to a municipality of similar size or similar geographic location. And with what you did today, or with what you're adopting today, we've already refined the data for the road network and the store network. So this is a huge win to the municipality. We've delivered the policy and the first iteration of the plan, which is also a great win or a great milestone for the municipality. So I would say you're on the right track. Some municipalities haven't even started their asset management plans yet. But others are a bit more advanced because they've started this practice a long time ago. So I would guess that you're in a good position because you already have the plan in place, the policy in place, and there's some future project that are gonna take place over the next year, which gonna increase your level of maturity by quite a bit. And with this, I mean the life cycle management strategies, the risk management frameworks, and the levels of service framework, which are going to get developed over the next few months, and then get integrated in an updated version of the plan, including the non-core assets.
Thank you. So we're in the middle of the pack, would you say, as far as having a plan and the development? Of course, the biggest challenge moving forward always, I think, for every municipality is securing the funding to make the plan work.
And it's thank you for saying that, and I'll tell you my personal perspective on this. What we're going to be developing as part of the next plan, which is included under this project scope, is what we refer to as financial strategy. So in the financial strategy, we do compare the sustainable funding revenues, which are your taxes, your OSIF taxes, and any other funding source that is considered sustainable by the province. And we do compare these to the annual capital requirements, and we end up with a gap. So typically, one-time grants would continue to fund some infrastructure projects, but having a good level of data maturity and a good level of planning would allow you to build a stronger business case to the provincial government, maybe on why do you need the extra money? Because this is your funding level, this is how much infrastructure you have, and this is your deficit. So by forcing the municipalities to adopt these plans or to work on these plans, what I think the province is trying to do is to eventually be able to compare apples to apples. So if you have a deficit, this is not necessarily a bad sign, because there's a deficit for a reason. If you have enough data to support your business case, then this might play in your favor when you're applying for funding, actually. And this is actually the case in British Columbia to a certain extent. I'm located in Vancouver myself, and I do work with lots of clients here. So asset management isn't regulated in BC. However, if you're applying for any type of provincial funding, there's like 20 or 30 questions about asset management and your data related to your asset management planning. If you can prove that you have some good data whenever you're submitting a funding application, your chances of getting the funding are higher, because the province would consider that these folks are doing a better job in kind of projecting for the future and knowing what assets they own and how should they manage them, and therefore they're qualified to be a grant recipient.
Thank you. So, and in your experience, then, if you're applying for a grant and your level of service that you've determined for your community is out of touch with the financial reality, would that hinder your application for grant dollars?
Can you come again? Sorry, I couldn't hear you properly.
So when it comes to applying for a grant for rehabilitation or replacement, if your projected service level is out of sync with your your finances or available finances, would the province or would the granting authority restrict you or want you to readjust or re-examine your service level?
So I've never seen this happen, but however, whenever discussing the concept of proposed levels of service, this has to be done with some consideration to the finances. Like it has to be reasonable to a certain extent. As long as you have a proposed level of service and you have a plan to get to it, a realistic plan, I don't see why they'll restrict you from doing that. But if you're trying to achieve a certain level of service that is way beyond reach, then I don't think that's a good practice in general.
Thank you.
So this is why we basically, and I did refer to this in the beginning of the presentation, this is why we really focus on the current level of service at the beginning, because we have to have a benchmark on the current level of performance in order to set the proposed or the desired level of performance. And I guess the province likes to use the word proposed instead of desired, because the word desired is a bit more optimistic to a certain extent.
Thank you. Any other questions? So I really appreciate your presentation and the time you've taken to give us a summary for council, and we look forward to continuing to work with you moving forward.
Thank you so much. And I would also like to thank staff, Michelle, and all the other staff, Karen, and the public works staff, because they helped a lot in gathering the data for this asset management plan. So thanks again.
Thank you. So I'm just wondering, does council want to walk through the asset management plan? Are you comfortable with the information that was provided in the agenda package? Councilor Buckle.
I think it's something that's going to be a little bit too much to think it was before the review. As far as the plan goes, the finances, like the numbers are there, how will we get to that? But I think it was staff to let us see.
And I think the most important part is, I mean, we did start with our budget for this year, having a 3-year financial plan moving forward. The real secret is having a plan that covers us for looking at maybe 20 or 30 years, similar to what the county does. And just as he was talking about pavement condition indexes, the county does have a target and are pretty close to staying on course. Current years accepted because of the increase in prices and inflation, but theirs is 70%. So, but they've been at it since I think 2014. And what's really important is that the financial plan of the county, every year, they start with a 5% tax increase as part of the financial plan. And that 5%, then they subtract growth from that, which they project to be 1.5 to 2%. So the annual tax levy is usually around 3%. But depending on things like investments, government grants, service fees, once they do all of those calculations and they look at the revenues that have come in the last 3 years, we've adjusted that 3% down to, I think it was 2.7 the 1 year, and the last 2 years it's been 2.5. But it just speaks to the importance of having that long-term financial plan, so you're not taking a guess or, you know, throwing a dart on the wall that, oh, this year we want to do 1% or 2% or. It's having that strategic plan based on your service level in order to achieve that target. And I think that's what he's saying, where the government is moving, is wanting to see the business case when municipalities apply for funding, especially when it comes to rehabilitation of roads or services. And I'll ask Michelle if he can add to that.
So, yeah, yeah, and, as we move forward, as we meet the 2024 target and the 2025 target, there will be additional information such as financial strategy, I would say tonight, this is the starting point. It's it's the building, it's the starting point for the building block. Now, if we move on, additional information will be obtained and more data will be to have a strong.
That's what I was.
I think the most daunting part of the whole process is, as we move forward, recognizing that gap that we have from reality to what that desire has. Because that is the daunting part, and we're in fundings. Because I personally feel that we're a bit behind in that process. Because of, you know, previous decisions and circumstances, and this year was a really good example of where prices are in that because we're behind, we're now sort of having to make major readjustments because prices have gotten away from us. And will that be a continued trend? So I think that there's going to be a lot of variables that we're going to have to examine on the table and get to that.
I would certainly agree, and I mean, we saw it with our own tenders here. We saw it at the county. There was only one road project at the county that came in under budget. Everything else was over budget to the tune, I think, of, if I'm not mistaken, it was around $10 million over the budgeted amounts. So they had to get their reserves, they had to delay some of the projects to the following years. So you're right, that is one, especially when you look at the figure where we have a 1.7 million target just to maintain what we have now. That's even before setting a service level.
Yeah.
As soon as you set a service level, you're gonna see that number go up. And we have to figure out as a council, what can we live with? What's a figure that's doable? I mean, we're averaging in the last 2 years about 1 million in road projects. So we're only 700,000 short. But it's, yeah. But at least we've started putting in $500,000 into the reserves every year, which is certainly a step in the right direction. The challenge will be to keep that up and to keep our target or increase our level of service from 1 million to even 1.5 or 1.2. Yes, Councilor.
One thing that changed everything for us is once they got a new assessment, it really increased our bottom line because what we were assessed at in 2016 and the prices were today. You know, that's going to be a big number between 20 years.
If Yeah, it certainly will have an impact. I guess at this point, we're not sure yet what kind of impact.
Well, I think it's gonna be usually taxpayer that increases in getting property taxes from the assessment. If you look around the places that are sold for $500,000, like in 2016, they're going with 200,000, 250. So every place on them is double, you know, and now when we do the assessment on them places.
But
Councilor Buckle.
So that doesn't really change our financial bottom line, it's just being through the tax, you're gonna be a property tax at a lower rate to make the same money because the value's going up. So it doesn't really change our financial position regardless of what those properties are worth. It's the number of properties that we have where we can spread out that tax base or that tax levy across. And again, that's what's gonna help us is growth, is getting more properties out there. Within reason, right, because people come here because of the way it is, so we don't want to destroy that. But again, growth is really the answer as opposed to assessment increases.
It certainly is. I mean, yeah, the more residents you have to spread out the tax burden, the more benefit there is against the problem. That's their own.
and businesses,
Yeah,
that's, I think, one of the, it's gonna be another driver for us. The more businesses we have. Tourism, all of those drivers. That's what we want to expect.
so I have a resolution that council approved the draft 2022 assessment management plan as presented. But I gotta move in a second, moved by Councilor Byrne, seconded by Councilor Robinson. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, Councilor Buckle,
Yes.
Councilor Burt,
Yes.
Councilor Robinson,
Yes,
Councilor Picciotto,
Yes,
and a yes, carried. Item 5.2 is the asset management policy. I have a resolution that council approves the draft asset management policy as provided. I got a move by Councilor Buckwald, seconded by Councilor Picciotto. Questions, comments? Seeing none, Councilor Buckwald,
Yes.
Councilor Burns,
Yeah.
Councilor Robinson,
yes,
Councilor Picciotto.
yes,
And yes, it's carried. Thank you. And 5.2.1 is the asset management policy. Now therefore, the Council of North Algona Wilberforce enact the following bylaw 2022-43 to adopt the asset management policy. I'm gonna move in a second, moved by Councilor Robinson, seconded by Councilor Buckwald. Comments, questions? Seeing none, Councilor Buckwald,
Yes.
Councilor Burks,
Yes.
Councilor Robinson,
yes,
Councilor Picciotto,
yes,
and yes, it's carried. Thank you. Item 5.3 is the snowdrifters request. And the resolution is that council defers item 5.3, the snowdrifters request until further information is received. Maybe I'll just ask staff to speak to that.
so we did receive a request from the directors, however, we had wanted to. Like that. For council, so we would be, clear on, what amounts they wanted to work on. Well, unfortunately, we didn't receive that by tonight's meeting, so we're recommending that this be deferred to next week. When that information is provided.
Can I get a mover and a seconder to defer? Moved by Councilor Burns, seconded by Councilor Robinson. Councilor Buckwald,
Yes.
Councilor Burns,
Yes.
Councilor Robinson,
yes,
Councilor Picciotto.
Yes.
And yes, it's carried. Thank you. Item 5.4 is the Eagle Leader Fall magazine. I have a resolution that council advertise in the Discover the Valley Fall magazine for the following ad rate, the full page at a rate of $5.95 plus tax. Can I get a move in a second? Moved by Council Buckland, seconded by Council Burke. Comments, questions? Seeing none, Council Buckland,
Yes.
Council Burke,
Yes.
Council Robinson,
Yes,
Council Reggie Phone.
Yes,
Yes, very good. Item 5.5 is investments. I have a resolution that council accepts this report as information and further directs staff to reinvest GIC investments in a 5-year escalator investment. Can I get a move in a second? Moved by Council Robinson, seconded by Council Buckland. Comments, questions? I just have one question. Is that investment redeemable at any time or just on the anniversary date or?
so it was only anniversary.
Councilor Robinson?
is that one of the ones that if the rates went up really low, you can put it out and put it back in?
Not that I'm aware of. So my understanding is it's a 5-year term, but the rate increases every year. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, Councilor Buckland,
Yes.
Councilor Burns, yes, Councilor Robinson,
Yes,
Councilor Reggie Phone.
Yeah,
Yes. And that's carried. Item 5.6 is the special projects coordinator updates for municipal Google profiles. I have a motion that council approves the following names for signing in my Google business profiles. Golden Lake Municipal Complex. Gami Outdoor Meeting Space. Crossroads Community Hall and Schoolhouse Park. I'm gonna move it in second. Moved by Councilor Burke, seconded by Councilor Robinson. Comments, questions? Councilor Buckle?
I don't like some of the names.
pardon me?
I don't like some of the names. The Golden Municipal Complex, one. To me, municipal complex is where you have offices. And where you have that sort of thing, we don't have that there. I did a quick Google search on the internet and I can't find anybody else that uses Golden Lake Community Center. So I'm not sure where that information was found, because as long as I lived there, it's been the Golden Lake Community Center.
it's anyone.
As long as I've lived in here, which is forever, it's always been the Golden Lake Community Center. So if maybe if you want to call it the community complex, but let's keep community in there. Because Crossroads Community Hall doesn't tie in with their brand recognition, their name, you should have the name in there. If not, the township, at least in the community that it's in. Because if someone is Google searching, Golden Lake, let's show them results that have Golden Lake in it. Because when I did it tonight, I got some results for Addison wrong. So let's try and keep it so that the name matches the area, is my thought.
So your concern is to the Golden Lake Municipal Complex and the Crossroads Community Hall.
And Schoolhouse Park.
And I would have a problem with number 2 simply because I can see how we are trying to bring the First Nations in there, but I mean, it's just a very difficult one to say where I think what's going to happen, people are just going to kind of mutter through it and not get the true meaning of the word. And if we're trying to get the true meaning of the word, then we have to, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, I'm just saying. we agree with that, somehow we have to have in brackets enunciation after it or something, because I think people are just gonna want to do it and say everything.
I don't see somebody searching that word on Google. I think if we're looking at maybe it so that it can be easily found, I don't see that happening.
And
That's.
maybe sorry, go ahead.
When you Google for community center, what on Google Maps, what comes up is the not community center. And the Google community center doesn't.
Yeah, on maps, but if you have to look at anything on the Google search. You'll actually get Golden Community Center with the correct address. So yeah, on maps you won't find it, but you'll find it on main Google. And if we put that recognition in there, and we do the Google Maps, we'll link to that. Because I know first they don't use the term Golden Community Center. All right, so that's a Google map that somebody just plugged that in.
They
As doing it, but I don't believe it was actually First Nations who did it. A lot of stuff on Google Maps is just put in the users. All right, so they that or I'm just thinking if we're going to have multiple things on one property that we're going to identify with that property, there should be something to all three. So if it's the Golden Community Center, then you've got the Golden Lake Park. And I understand that the business without definition, so maybe it's Golden Lake Community Park. Right, or the Golden Lake Community Outdoor Meeting Space, and then we can add the name to it that they recommend on the signage. Right, but I'm just thinking if we want to identify, we want to get people to come and recognize it, we have to tie that into our marketing. And that's what we're talking about here is marketing for Google.
And I don't understand enough about Google, I'm just wondering if we have like the Golden Lake Community Complex, for instance. Would the parks that Paul, would they show up on the search as well? Can they be connected so that they would show up?
They could really all depend on how you do it, but again, if people are looking for park, they'll put in Golden Lake Community Park. That can come up as a separate search result when they search Golden Lake Community Center or Community Hall or Community Complex. Golden Lake Community Center still it's the best with me, but that's just I'm a local, that's what it always been. So and I'm not the only one in that quote. I always noticed when you went out and you talked to residents of this township, and you asked where the Golden Community Center was, eventually they can tell you. So if they know where it is, let's let the public know where it is. It's all the same thing. Yeah, Golden Community Park could be the park area, the Golden Lake Community Outdoor Meeting Space. Could be tied into it, Golden Lake Community Center. Use complex, I'm not crazy about it, because complex is more of a business thing. But that's my comment on it, or my suggestions.
That's already going on.
I'm okay with the word complex, because later on we may have more things in them. But I do agree with Councilor Buckle, like the Golden Lake, you could say the community complex, or you could say the Golden Lake Schoolhouse Park. You know, I think if we add Golden Lake to it, I think it's important because then we know it's probably somewhere in Golden. You know, the Crossroads Community Hall, I really, you said the Golden Lake Community Hall, I think I would figure out what that is. Just because it's been such a long standing tradition of Golden Lakes.
That's what I was saying.
I tend to agree with both answers, like having golden lake in there. If we wanted to name that outdoor meeting space as it sits there, that could be a separate entity within the area. Just like if you have a building and different rooms have different names. So you could leave that space, the outdoor meeting space, which is supposed to be an environment and inclusion, as something separately named to the rest of the complex.
And I think, so that we could pay, respect to our neighbors, you could still have it in brackets, because I've seen it on the reserve, you know, where it's just a dollar or something like that, for the school fund. Then they have brackets with them. There's no reason why we can't do the same, right? I mean. And I think that would just be a good way of showing that, you know, purpose. The unofficial, official name.
Thank you, Mayor Rose. I believe the intention is to have them all separate, but with one all encompassing, and that's what was meant by the Golden Lake Municipal Complex. That was to include the fire department, the outdoor meeting place, the community hall, and the park. But that was one sign to include everything. Then each of those will have their own signs. And the way Cameron was explaining it to us today, the outdoor meeting space will have a plaque with that name, the pronunciation, and a little bit of history in the area of the meeting place.
Councilor Buckle.
I still like community over municipal. The other thing we have to consider too, is we also have, the Golden Lake Municipal Building.
Yeah.
Which is the worst stretch, which is off site, so now if you've got this municipal, now you've got confusion, it's working out. So I think, and again, if you want to use complex. I'm okay with that, it's not my first choice, but at this moment, I can't come up with a better word to use for it. Okay, but I think it's important that we put the Golden Lake in.
Councilor Burke.
I feel we should keep it to the only use and. It's been on that for years.
So, I mean. Sorry.
I guess when after Laura has explained it to us, like that first word means all the stuff that's within there. So I agree with Councilor Buckle. I like to say the Golden Lake Community Complex, and in that complex, in that area, we have a number of different other things. I like to get rid of the word municipal simply because when I think about it, I just think of a government organization as opposed to a community. And the whole thing is, it is a community thing. And I know what you're saying, the community hall and stuff, but I mean, what we're doing now is looking at an umbrella name for all those other things and fitting in. So to me, getting rid of municipal, sticking in community kind of helps you in the council burn. And it still allows us to say all of these entities are under this umbrella.
I would agree, and I like the idea that and I can't pronounce it without the breakdown of the word underneath, but I like that staying in there as an outdoor meeting space, especially if there is a plaque that breaks that shows the pronunciation of the word and a little history. So those are the first two. So we're still at Crossroads Community Hall and Schoolhouse Park. Are we saying that we want that as?
I think those should all be purchased Golden Lake.
I'm okay to add Golden Lake to the Schoolhouse Park. Doesn't really matter. I agree, we should have Golden Lake because it is all in Golden Lake.
Yeah.
The other option is, if you're naming within a bigger name, do they need to have crosswalks? It's just a community hall. Unless you're dedicating to something specific.
You got a big sign that says,
Because,
community complex,
yes,
and. You know, the meeting hall or the gathering hall or
yeah,
recreation hall is here. The park is here. The open space center is here, the fire hall is here. We have one overarching
yes.
sign. Now we're gonna do a big overarching sign, so we're gonna close the whole site. But
Just a question for staff, Laura, were you saying that Cameron's idea was just to have? So, yes, there's a sign for the complex, that could probably be somewhere visible on the grounds. The Crossroads Community Hall sign was just on the door of the community center, or?
It would be where the sign is now, where it's now said Township Community Center.
municipal community center.
So it will be across the front. And it's in some type of wood. So there isn't a lot of room for a huge name. Kind of similar to what's there in size. And what was there in size?
What about Golden Lake Crossroads Hall?
Well,
No,
I still like communities more welcome.
yeah. The other thing that, what you don't want is if you water it down, the name loses its identity. Because for many people, it is Golden Lake Community. If you start putting something else on it after a while, people are not even gonna know it.
The number of people that were upset because the sign on the side of the building used to be blah, blah, blah. Rich or just whatever it was. And then after amalgamation, they had to take it down because it wouldn't work, and it just became used for community hall. The number of people that were really upset about that because what you can't put a new sign up with the proper name. I don't see that happen either now, so.
Just a number of people that were upset when they came with.
And it's white.
Right,
Oh.
I stay away from the post office for 3 weeks. Just everything.
Oh, I stayed away from the family dissipates for a few days.
Oh, everything.
I was thinking that is. Can't believe things weird.
but in fairness to staff, they have the suggestion boxes and cards throughout the community, so. People have an opportunity beforehand to indicate their preferences.
Oh, they want to see when action.
You know, people are too busy for stuff. If that's not what happens, that they don't like doing, then either.
But mind you, subsequent to that, others would say, okay, I'm seeing the vision.
So just verify for this suggestion. So Golden Lake Community Complex. And just. I'm thinking Golden Lake Outdoor Meeting Space. And use that name as internal and in the descriptors. Golden Lake Community Hall. And Golden Lake Community Park. Because even once the signage goes up, it can even just be community park, once they're there, they don't need to go away, but for the internet stuff, I think the whole. Name should be, so like they search Golden Lake. It pings on all of this. As opposed to only pinging on the ones that are Golden Lake. If they all have it in it. They can set up in Google preferences to go for all of this.
Yeah, I agree, other than the second one, I like leaving it the way it is, because to me, otherwise you're really not. You're really not demonstrating the importance of the First Nations as our neighbors.
I'm okay with the same. Again, I'm just looking at the fact that, yeah, I don't see. too many people Google searching that,
Right.
but that's fine. If it ties in. Again, on the site properties to the other ones that it would come up to.
So is that clear where council wants to go? Or-
Repeat them back, this is sure. So we have the Golden Lake Community Complex.
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
the second one will leave.
Second one, no change.
No change.
Golden Lake Community Hall. And Golden Lake Schoolhouse Park.
I think it is, or do you just want to go with Golden Lake Park? I think we thought there was too many. That would be too big
It
on
might-
a sign.
Well, on the sign of the schoolhouse park, right, because it's a growing. Like one sign with that, but yeah, I'm fine with it.
Are we clear? Not yet.
No, Golden Lake. Schoolhouse or just,
For schoolhouse park.
That's right.
With the Golden Lake Park.
With Golden Lake.
Well, Golden Lake for Google, but the signage can just be schoolhouse park.
on all of them except for the complex one or?
You were just thinking community hall and you were just thinking school for the sign, right? You were just saying community hall would be the sign on the hall. Schoolhouse park would be the sign on the park, right?
Yeah, I think for the whole sign, I think. Community hall. Community park.
I think the idea behind the schoolhouse is because it's.
It used to be. It connected to the history. Which is part of our strategic plan. Connecting to our history.
So then why don't we make it instead of community hall or schoolhouse?
Well, that's why I like schoolhouse park.
Because there's not that many people battle.
Making it more difficult, Mark.
No, I'm so confused now.
For the Google search, we're going to have Golden Lake Community Complex. The second one will stay the same as our meeting space. Third one, Golden Lake Community Hall. Fourth one, Golden Lake Schoolhouse Park. Then for the signage, the first two will remain the same. The third one will become just the community hall and the fourth one Schoolhouse Park.
I think, yeah.
From community complex. As opposed to municipal.
Yeah.
complex.
Yes,
Yeah.
community.
I think we have consensus. So can I just leave that with staff? I don't have to make any changes on my motion here
As amended.
as amended. Okay. Councilor Buckwell,
Yes.
Councilor Burke. Yes. Councilor Robinson,
Yes.
Councilor Reggie Coleman.
Yeah.
Yes. Carried. And that brings us to our. We have no close tonight, so that brings us to our confirming bylaw. The bylaw 2022-44 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council for August 3rd, 2022. You read the first and second time this third day of August 2022. Can I get a move in a second? And moved by Councilor Reggie Schoenfeld, seconded by Councilor Buckwell. So read the third time and finally passed this third day of August 2022. Councilor Buckwell,
Yes.
Councilor Burke. Yes. Councilor Robinson,
Yes.
Councilor Reggie Schoenfeld.
Yes.
And a yes. Very, thank you. Item number 9 is adjournments. I have a motion that this August 3rd, 2022 special meeting of council adjourns at 8:09 p.m. Moved by Councilor Robinson, seconded by Councilor Burke. Councilor Buckwell,
Yes.
Councilor Burke. Yes. Councilor Robinson,
Yes.
Councilor Reggie Schoenfeld.
Yes.
And a yes. That's carried. Thank you very much.